What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a comedic spin on all the goings-on in the world. My name is Jacob Paveo. As always, I come to you from the Great White North every single Tuesday evening, Eastern Standard Time, fresh for download to listen to at work Wednesday morning for everyone, the entire globe around on all major podcasting platform. This podcast comes to you completely ad-free, and all that I ask is you subscribe on any of those podcasting platforms or over on YouTube and tell your friends about me either in person or with a share over on social media. And if you have a second, please go rate us 5 stars over there on Apple Podcast because it is a great helps us jump right up to the top of those searches. Today, I am quite ill, actually. So I just topped up my cough syrup, which means I've got a bit of a buzz going. Kind of, but not really. And I am trying to get through this without coughing, so there's going to be a whole lot of stopping and starting and editing, which is fine. But because of that, I don't really want to laugh at all, because when I laugh, I start to cough, and when I start to cough, I don't stop coughing. So that's a bit of a problem. So I decided to try something a little bit different. I wanted to pick one candidate who is really interesting to me. So I want to talk about Bernie Sanders because I think it's interesting to discuss Bernie as a Canadian. So I come from a nation of a lot of different social welfare programs. If he was a politician here in Canada, he might not necessarily be on the left for most politics here, which is an interesting thing to discuss. So I decided that this week I'm just going to do that, and I've decided to call it 20 minutes on, or what am I going to call it? Sorry, I screwed that one up. It's going to be called Bernie 2020 in 20 minutes or less. So thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you leave us here today. Lots of stuff in the works. I am working on some merch that people would be able to purchase, so that's fun. More information is going to be coming on that next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about a big Canadian concern. For those of you who may be interested, the CRTC, that's the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications. Don't blame me for actually knowing what that means. It's because I went to school and studied it. They have released some new guidelines that they are hoping to get through legislation, which would require news companies to be licensed by the government, which would actually affect me potentially, which is really interesting. So we're going to talk all about that next week. Don't forget to come back for that. But for now, this, hopefully I don't screw this name up, is Bernie 2020 in 2020 or less, because this is the Laugh to Learn podcast. See, I screwed it up. It's Bernie 2020 in 20 minutes or less. This is the Laugh to Learn podcast. Hey, check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. Bernie. All right, so I wanted to start this off just by coming at this from an introduction of who exactly I am and where I fall politically, because I think it's only fair to just put everything out there before I even start. So, politically, I am a, well, not politically, but geographically, I suppose. I am a Canadian, so it's an interesting way to look at this. That said, as my listeners will know, I follow both American and Canadian politics very closely, and I know a whole lot about Bernie Sanders, and all of your other big candidates for this coming election year. But the reason I wanted to do this is I think it's a very interesting perspective that I hold because, as I'm sure you've heard before, if Bernie Sanders were running, say, here in Canada, he definitely wouldn't be part of our left-wing party, the NDP here, at least not with his current platform. I'm not saying he wouldn't adjust to that platform were he here, but just on what he's running on today, he certainly would not fall as a member of that party. It's actually he's probably more in line with the Canadian Conservative Party than any other because of things like his stance on guns and some of the stuff that he's done in his home state. I think that so I fall on the Canadian centrism, so that is far left for Americans, but I am I have typically voted, I should say. I'm not a member anymore, although I once was, but I've typically voted and continue to vote with our central party of the main three, which we call the Liberal Party. So that's kind of where I sit politically, but I want to look at this from just an objective Canadian perspective. So I think a good starting place would just be to go through some points of basically the good and the bad of Bernie Sanders. So I just made a few points that I want to hit on, and then we'll go through what exactly I think would happen will happen in this coming election, and then I kind of want to say what I think will happen, what would happen if he does win the nomination, and then what would happen if he did become president. I think it's interesting and important things to look at. First, I'll give you a bad point. So I want to start just by saying something that's been in the news recently, although this is well known going back to when he was running against Hillary in the last primary. Everyone was saying that when this comes out, it's going to be the end of him, and it never really came out because he was never the front runner long enough. I don't know if he ever actually was the front runner, maybe after a few early primaries, but at this point he is definitely the front runner, and it has come up. So he quite often praises dictators, and specifically communist dictators. So the big thing that he did this week was he said that Castro, of course, the leader of Cuba, and I'm talking, or he, I should say, was talking specifically about Fidel Castro, who's now dead, and his brother is leading the country. I should know this because, again, I'm a Canadian. I can legally travel to Cuba, and I happened to be there when Castro died. I was young, but I was there, which is a strange coincidence. But that said, he praised Castro, saying that he brought literacy to the nation, and they do now have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. The problem is, and this is something that it'll be so easy to tear him apart when he's running for, a presidential election, is, yes, Castro brought literacy to Cuba, but the reason that he did it was so that he could indoctrinate, right? So he made sure that everyone could read. That way they could read Marxist and Leninist books, and he could read Marx and Lenin, right? Or the people rather could read Marx and Lenin, and they could read the Castro ideology and books that were approved by the government. So yes, it's fantastic that everyone can read. However, everyone is only allowed to read what the government says they can read. So it's kind of a catch-22. You would almost rather people didn't know how to read, because then they can make up their own decisions. But when you're taught how to read at 4 or 5 years old and you're told you can only read certain things, that leads to extremist points of view. Case in point, in religious-based terror, that's exactly how it starts. That's how it continues, and it's clearly a bad thing. As well, let's go for a good now. Left populism. I put this down as a good thing because I think it's really cool to see, right? In 2016, we saw a right-wing form of populism. I'm sorry if my speech is pretty rough. I already mentioned that I was sick, and that's what's causing it today. But left-wing populism is a cool thing to see, much like right-wing populism was. So I already said I am a Canadian liberal centrist, sort of, but I thought it was really interesting to watch the rise of Donald Trump. It's the sort of thing that people are going to be talking about literally for decades and possibly centuries to come. It's a fascinating thing. And Bernie Sanders seems to be the left-wing version of Trump, right? People seem to be fed up with politicians. I certainly think the way that the last primary season went, where Bernie had, it seems like, the whole thing taken from him. I know there's like a lot of conspiracy, and then afterwards some leading members at the DNC kind of said that yes, Bernie probably should have won, but superdelegates came into play and they selected Hillary. It's a whole mess, right? But this time around in 2020, what Bernie offers is actually really, really interesting because he is the Donald Trump of the left. People are sick of those politicians. They're sick of what happened last time. And it seems like they now have an opportunity to elect and get behind someone in a real way. I mean, really, the only other candidate that had people backing him and like a movement was Andrew Yang, but that was much, much, much smaller. Bernie has his movement from 2016 that has been amplified. This is why I keep saying Andrew Yang is the guy to watch for next time, because Bernie took what he had before and he amplified it and made it incredible. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. Some of the bad things, rising taxes. Clearly, he's going to have to raise taxes. He has said that. I think no matter how you explain it, no matter how you say that even though taxes are going up, you're going to save money on healthcare and whatnot, people just do not speak to that. They don't like to hear that. It's a bad thing. Also, he has no real plan to pay for it. Has not said how he's going to pay for this in full. His Wall Street tax is fantastic. I actually don't disagree with it, and that's coming from someone who buys and sells stocks. But I don't think there's a problem in saying that, we're going to charge you like a penny on every transaction, and that's going to go straight to the government no matter how big or how small that transaction is, including options, and that's going to go as tax. I don't mind that. But it's not going to pay for all of it. He needs to find a lot more money and quickly. Also, these plans will not go through the House and Senate. So there's no way the Democrats are going to win the president, the House, and the Senate. They might be able to hold the House. They will not win the Senate. I think all projections are showing that it's not even going to be close again. And they might win the presidency. So they're not going to win all three. They might be able to get something through the House like they could right now, but it's going to get stopped by the Senate, and it'll never be passed into law. Yeah, so it's kind of a bad thing. But a good thing is modernizing the USA. It's said all the time that the U.S. is the only country that doesn't have global healthcare. It's mind-blowing for me as a Canadian, and people keep saying, like, well, look at the size of the country. It'll never work. That doesn't make any sense because we pay a percentage of our income, and that goes to our healthcare. There's no reason why you can't pay a percentage of your income to go to your healthcare. Just because you're talking about $10 trillion instead of, $1 trillion, it's not to say that it can't happen. In fact, it's the opposite. It's to say, look, it's happening elsewhere, and you should be able to do it. Aren't you the greatest nation in the world? So prove it and modernize that. But also, he's talking about clearing student debt. This is something that I disagree with. And to go back retroactively, clear all student debt and make all school free all the way up. No, I paid for university. I don't mind government loans for university. I'm quite supportive of it, as I have been on this podcast. However, I'm not for free university. I don't want my work and the effort that I put in to be taken away by someone who, because yes, there are a lot of people who can't afford school who really need help to get to school. Give them a loan. Make it so that anyone can get a loan to go to school and money is never a problem. You just have to pay it back. Also, you would have to kind of do what Canada did and put limits on how much you can raise tuition rates by, because that's very important, so that the schools can't just keep charging more and more. That way your loans don't just become higher and higher and higher. But I'm in a place where I couldn't afford school. I wouldn't have been able to pay for it. I got government loans. I paid for school, and guess what I'm doing right now? Paying them off as a successful accountant, right? That's the way that the system should work, I think, and that's the way that I'd like to see it moving forward. Another bad, I don't see how he wins purple states. He can definitely win the Rust Belt. That's positive. He can definitely win states that are unionized Rust Belt states. But how does he win Nevada? How does he win Nevada? Maybe Arizona, Florida, the Carolinas. You need these places. When you start talking about the Rust Belt, and that's like, Michigan and all the way down to basically Indiana and everything in between, like northern New York, maybe. He should actually be able to sweep New York. These are the sorts of things where Bernie can win those unionized states. That vote based on passion, right? They're very passionate states. They go back and forth all the time. However, there are purple states. Texas is kind of becoming a purple state because of how many Latinos are moving there. And as I said already, Arizona. But these are purple states that don't vote based on passion. They vote based on policy. And he doesn't win there. But he needs to win those states. So I don't really know how that works. Another good thing, though, is that Bernie definitely has the moral high ground on Trump. He marched in the 60s for equality for Black people, right? He supported women's movements from the very beginning. Like, he literally marched with Martin Luther King Jr., right? He definitely has the high ground. Didn't cheat on his wife, as far as I'm aware. Hasn't come out yet, anyways. So he's got that, but the opposition research is going to be bad. He had his honeymoon in the Soviet Union, literally the USSR. It wasn't Russia. It was communist Soviet Union. That's going to be bad. It's going to hurt him. And a lot of people in the middle of the country, and sorry, not the middle of the country, but the middle of the political spectrum, are not going to vote for Bernie Sanders. They might not vote for Trump, but I think they're far more likely to vote for Trump because he's more a typical politician as far as policy is concerned than Sanders for an American. Sanders does not come across as an American politician. As I said before, he comes across as a Canadian politician. And that's probably why I look at his politics, and a lot of Canadians look at his politics, and Europeans as well, and they say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. That's how we run our country. But I do get that it's not how you run your country, and I don't know how that does throughout the nation. So I ultimately think that Bernie Sanders will only be in office for 4 years. I think no matter what, if Bernie is the nominee for the Democrats, we will have an election in what does that make it, 2024 or 2023? 2020. Oh my god, it's 2020. So in 2024 we'll have an election for sure. There will not be an incumbent. He just had a heart attack, which is a big negative as well that I didn't mention. I don't see him running into his 80s and winning. So no matter what, I think if it's Trump versus Sanders, we are right back where we started in 4 years with two brand new nominees. Now, what are my thoughts on this 2020 election if it comes down to Trump and Bernie? Bernie has a chance. He does because of the Rust Belt. I think he can do well. The Carolinas are going to be interesting because he definitely, at least in the Democratic Party and in early polling nationwide, has the African-American support. But does he have it against Trump on actual election day? I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. I'm kind of hoping that Bernie's the nominee. I don't support any American politician because Trump is not my president. I'm not an American. But I think it's going to be super interesting to watch from far away. Ultimately, though, I do think Trump wins against Bernie. But what would happen if he were to become president. This is where I think things get really bad for Democrats, because I think he doesn't get a single thing done. I think he might go down in history, or he would potentially go down in history as the president to get the least amount of stuff done. And I'm not being like hyperbolic with that. I absolutely believe that is true, that nothing he wants to pass would pass. Not one thing. You know, Obama in his first term basically just got healthcare through. But think, like, for those of you who remember, because that's when I first started really following politics, and I remember like being like, why can't it pass? I don't get it. And then learning the whole system and the roadblock and how that was designed to happen. How does Bernie get through that? I don't think he does. I really don't think he does. And his healthcare ideas are way, way further out than Obama's. And Obama's were seen as extreme, and that was only, 12 years ago now, roughly. So ultimately, what it comes down to, because I promised you Bernie 2020 in 20 or less, and now I'm pretty sure I'm over 20. So it's Bernie 2020 in roughly 21 or 22. I think that Bernie Trump is going to be fantastically interesting. I don't mind Bernie Sanders and what he proposes, but that, again, is being spoken as a Canadian who is more liberal. And yeah, so I'm super excited to see what happens, and I think you guys should be too. If you guys are not following along, I really encourage you every single day or every time that you have like a few minutes, you're scrolling through Facebook or something, jump over to YouTube, watch some CNN, watch some Fox, watch some MSNBC, watch some random person on YouTube giving you like, this is what happened today. Come back every single week to the Laugh to Learn podcast. Generally, if this is your first time here, my episodes are closer to 40 minutes to an hour, somewhere in that range. But again, kind of sick today. So, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to send y'all to the outro. Thank you for tuning in this week. And I'll see you on the other side of the guitar strum. Thank you all so much for listening to the podcast this week. I know it was a short one. Again, I apologize. But yeah, this cough just kind of has me off. But I promise you an episode every week, and I will intend to keep that promise. I really encourage you to take this discussion we had today outside into the real world with your friends or your family, or with me over on Instagram. As always, you can reach me at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com or anytime on social media. This podcast comes to you completely ad-free, and all that I ask, it's a rough week, is that you share it with your friends and family, subscribe on the podcasting app or YouTube, and tell your friends about me each and every week. So once again, I come every single Tuesday evening, Eastern Standard Time, fresh for download the entire world around on Wednesday mornings. Thank you all for sticking with me. Let me know what you think about Bernie Sanders and the other candidates. Let me know what you think about Trump. Maybe you're a Trump fan and you think that it doesn't matter who it is, he'll win. I would actually agree with you. And yeah, I've got nothing else to say. Hopefully next week I'm feeling better. I'm planning on, like I've already told you, doing a fairly big episode next week on the CRTC news guidelines and what Canada's trying to do to control our news system, control me and my podcast, making me get a license. It's a crazy story that I'm working on for next week. And yeah, I'm really excited to do it, but we're going to have to wait a full 7 days to get there. So until next time, friends, keep on laughing and keep on learning.